All right, we are going to analyze CRAP principles for web design. Now, hopefully you've read the article that this is based on first. You should do that and complete your notes. But we're going to talk about those 4 elements of design. It goes for designing just about anything, but we're going to look specifically for designing for the web. So the first letter is C. C stands for contrast. Contrast can be established in lots of different ways, but the main point is it's about making distinct elements stand out, and it's used to drive attention to specific elements in a design. So let's go over here to this McDonald's page. Whenever we look at this, there's going to be certain things our eye is going to be drawn to in this slideshow. For instance, right now, my eyeballs are drawn to those hamburgers and that big number 5, and part of that is because of the contrast. Contrast in 2 ways. One of those is that the hamburgers are big, so they're bigger than a lot of the other things on the page. And the other because of this color and how it stands out. And now I really want McDonald's, and my lunch is tuna. So anyway, looking at color. Color is the first one we're going to talk about. Generally, contrast can be established by using colors that are opposite each other in a color wheel. Those are complementary colors. Now we have a whole color lesson where we talk about analogous, I can't say it, colors, colors in triads. There's lots of different color schemes that you can use for web design. The basic is, well, of course, is complementary, and then those others are a little bit more interesting. But the starting point is that colors that are opposite the color wheel are going to be bright and differentiated from each other. As a rule, you want to have high contrast between background colors and text colors. So, like this black on a white background, it's very easy to read. Now, this brown on this gold background, maybe not as easy to read. That does not have high contrast, like you're going to see between the 5 and the circle, for instance, here. You need to also ensure that your colors don't strain the user's eyes. So as we all know, there are some colors that if you put them close to each other, make it very difficult on your eyeballs. Now, I don't see any colors glancing at this McDonald's webpage that do that, but like if you've ever put red on a green background or yellow on blue, depending on the shade, sometimes it kind of hurts your eyes, and we don't want our users to strain their eyes. Now, a quick way, according to the article, to know if you have good contrast or not is to take a screenshot of it and turn it black and white, like grayscale. So I've done that already here in Pixlr. I've taken a screenshot of this and popped it into Pixlr and hit the button and made it black and white. And you can see here, now we can really look at that contrast without being distracted by the actual colors. So for instance, like I mentioned, this use the app to order does not stand out very well on this button, and it could be very difficult for people to read, particularly people maybe with color blindness and things. So that low contrast could be an issue. So that's just something to keep in mind. The second thing that's mentioned is size, and as I mentioned before with these big old hamburgers, size is another part of contrast, which can be maintained between elements by just differentiating how big they are. So clearly this 2 favorites for just $5 is going to grab my attention, just like the $5 grabbed my attention. So size is important, and important elements need to be significantly larger than the elements that are near them. Now, one thing that you need to think about is with regards to, say, text and headings, is you need to make sure you can tell the difference in those sizes. So for instance, if I'm using an H2, I may not want to use an H3 right next to it because they're so close in size. I would want to use paragraph with the proper size. But hey, what if I used an H4? And H4 is basically the same size as paragraph text. It's just not bold, right? Well, that might be one where we would have to override that paragraph and make that text smaller if we wanted to use that heading size. Or we need to rethink our heading size. But we want to make sure that we have good size contrast. And then finally, shape. And this can be as basic as just adding round corners to something. Matter of fact, if you look at these buttons are just very gently rounded on the edges. And that would create contrast depending on what it's on. Now in here, that's not going to contribute to contrast on this one. You could say this shape certainly does, though. This red shape creates a lot of contrast because otherwise there would be a white number 5 just sitting out here. So you can use a combination of circular elements with square elements, like combining multiple shapes to create that contrast. Again, not a great example here. I mean, I guess you could argue there's a white shape and a gold shape here, and that does create that contrast, which makes that button stand out. Okay, so next we're going to look at R, and R is repetition. And repetition is how you maintain consistency in design, and that really has to do with your branding. If I go from page to page in this McDonald's website, there are some things that stay consistent all the way through. The color scheme is consistent. The repetition of the golden arches in the top left-hand corner is consistent. That repetition of elements is what gives identity to a design. Now let's go to this other web page. I've got this Three Hermanos Taqueria. Notice here, if we're looking at all of this, we do see here's some nice contrast here, these nice light letters on a dark background. We also have some contrast with regards to sizing on the page. Low contrast down here with this color on this color. But let's look for repetition on this page. If I go from page to page, again, the buttons are in the same spot on every page. The logo is in the same place on every page. The phone number is located in the same place on every page. So I know I can find my way around here, and that repetition is practiced through the use of color, shape, and it could be through other things like texture, size, or other elements of the design, such as the fonts. So this is using a special type of font. The headings are all using a certain type of font. So having that font type, font size, font color, and even the style of images. If you have like a certain filter that you use for all of your images. You see that on Instagram sometimes, like they always use the same filter so they're all going to match. Some websites do that as well. Using a repeated set of colors and a style for text and images contributes really nicely to repetition as well. Okay, A. A stands for alignment. And alignment really dictates the way every element is placed on the design. It's set up to basically create order. We want things to be lined up in such a way that the page seems organized, that we don't just have stuff slapped all over the place. So, you know, when we look at a web page, we're going to talk a lot in this class about setting up grids and kind of looking at a web page essentially as 12 columns and how we're positioning them in each of those areas. So when we look on here, they're consistent here with the alignment. They've got all of these are aligned the same, makes it very easy to see what's happening on this page. We have alignment down here with all of these buttons. They're used in columns. That sort of thing is showing that these are in here for a meaningful purpose. They're in here in a meaningful way. No element in a design should just be positioned arbitrarily. You shouldn't just slap something anywhere, and it needs to connect to the other elements. That's kind of important for having that cohesiveness that we're looking for. The two basic kinds of alignments that are mentioned in the article were edge alignment. That's where something is positioned against the edge. For instance, here, left alignment is edge alignment. These are aligned on the left-hand side of the screen. That's edge alignment. And then, of course, center alignment, which we're all familiar with because we've used that to center titles and so forth for forever. Here's an example of center alignment. Center alignment is not something that you just want to use everywhere. Notice here, it works out nicely in a card or in a little div box of some sort. It looks nice there. But we don't want to have center alignment for the majority of our web page. It doesn't look right. It's confusing to the eye because we think of centering as being headings. Or maybe like if you think about a coupon or a business card, you know, if there's some small thing and that's centered. But, you know, this paragraph underneath this picture should not be centered unless it's just a caption on the picture. So you do want to be careful about that alignment, and that alignment needs to have purpose. Okay, and finally the P. We're to the P, and the P stands for proximity. Proximity principle states that elements that are associated with each other should be placed closely together. And that makes perfect sense. Here are these reviews. These reviews all go together, and therefore they are all listed right together in this box. It wouldn't make very much sense to put this reviews here and then have reviews kind of scattered all over the page. So proximity of things that go together. If I have a map, what am I looking for that needs to be near that map? The address, because it makes sense that those two things should be placed next to each other in that design. Okay, so those are some things to think about. Having headings with a descriptive paragraph. So here's a heading, here's a descriptive paragraph. A gap between text whenever it's not related to paragraph is important. You just want to make sure there's a differentiation between blocks of text. Like, see how there's a gap here? That's important because we don't want these two pictures running into each other and then making it more complicated about what goes with what beneath. So just think about your page elements and how can you differentiate them on the page if they don't belong to each other, and how can you make them close to each other if they do. And they use a repetition to do it here as well, but also proximity. There's picture, there's a heading, there's paragraph, there's a button to learn more. I can click on that. It's going to take me a page about their coffees, and then I can learn more about all the coffees here. And they're all set up in that same way. So hopefully I've kind of walked you through a website or two here to give you some ideas of how to apply these design principles, because you're going to apply them to a website of your choosing as well.